In 1162, Mongolia was a fractured landscape of warring tribes, where wealth meant horses, sheep, and the strength to keep them. No central authority existed. No shared currency united the clans. The Keret, Naiman, Merkit, and Taichiud tribes fought endless cycles of raids and revenge. Into this chaos, Temujin was born. Traditional steppe economics were brutal but simple. Horses served as currency. A man's wealth was measured in the animals he could defend. Chinese empires to the south paid tribute to keep nomads from raiding. This tributary system had existed for centuries, gold and silk flowing north in exchange for peace. But young Temujin saw a fatal flaw in this system. When Temujin's father was poisoned by rival Tatars, his clan abandoned the family. Here's the part that economists still debate. Watching his family starve, Temujin realized that traditional wealth meant nothing when your own tribe could abandon you overnight. Gold couldn't buy loyalty. Horses couldn't guarantee protection. The richest chief could become the poorest outcast in a single betrayal. Then Genghis Khan did something that would make modern CEOs jealous. At age 16, Temujin began his first economic innovation. Instead of hoarding resources like traditional chiefs, he shared everything equally with his followers. When he rescued his kidnapped wife Berta, he distributed the recovered dowry among his rescuers. This wasn't generosity. It was revolutionary economics. Jamuka, his blood brother, represented the old way. Born to nobility, Jamuka believed in bloodline wealth. Their friendship would shatter over this fundamental difference. "You chose slaves over brothers," Jamuka would later accuse. But Temujin wasn't choosing slaves. He was creating shareholders. The pattern was already emerging. Traditional chiefs kept the best horses, the finest weapons, the most beautiful wives for themselves. Temujin gave his best horse to the man who could ride it fastest. He armed his best archer with the finest bow, regardless of birth. What happened next revolutionized economics forever. Toghrul Khan, leader of the powerful Keraite tribe, became Temujin's mentor. The Keraite possessed traditional wealth, gold from China, silk from the trade routes, iron weapons from settled peoples. But Temujin learned something crucial. All that wealth couldn't prevent Toghrul's own brothers from repeatedly overthrowing him. Traditional wealth created enemies within your own family. This is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. While other chiefs fought to control existing wealth, Temujin began creating wealth from nothing. He recruited the despised and discarded, slaves, outcasts, youngest sons with no inheritance. These people had nothing to lose and everything to gain. In economic terms, he was acquiring undervalued human capital at zero cost. By 1190, Temujin commanded several hundred followers, not through gold or hereditary power, but through a simple promise. In his tribe, merit would determine wealth. A slave who could shoot straight would eat better than a noble who couldn't. This meritocracy attracted talent from every tribe. Engineers, craftsmen, even Chinese administrators began defecting to join him. Remember this number. It becomes important. One talented individual who joined Temujin could multiply the tribe's wealth by teaching skills to dozens of others. Traditional chiefs hoarded knowledge. Temujin transformed it into compound interest. The implications were staggering. But traditional wealth meant nothing when your own tribe could abandon you overnight. Wealth is worthless if you're dead. This became Temujin's first principle as he built his power base. But the real genius was still hidden. While other tribal leaders measured wealth in gold and livestock, Temujin was creating history's first human blockchain, the Mingan system. Here's where conventional economics breaks down. In 1197, Temujin faced his first major test. After defeating the Taichiud tribe, his followers expected traditional plunder rights, every man taking what he could carry. Instead, Temujin centralized all captured wealth and distributed it according to a revolutionary formula. Every warrior received an equal base share. Additional shares were awarded based on battlefield performance, not birth status. The outcry was immediate. Noble-born warriors protested receiving the same base share as former slaves. This is the moment when wealth itself was redefined. Temujin's response changed everything. Your father's courage doesn't make your arrow fly straighter. In one sentence, he shattered 5,000 years of hereditary economics. What followed defied 5,000 years of economic tradition. The Mingan system organized society into units of 1,000 households. But these weren't random groupings. Each Mingan combined diverse skills: herders, craftsmen, warriors, administrators. Think of it as history's first integrated economic units. A single Mingan could function as a self-sufficient economy, producing everything from horseshoes to arrows to fermented milk. The economic advantage of meritocracy became immediately apparent. When the Karaite tribe's best horse trainer defected to Temujin, he didn't just bring his personal skills. Within 1 year, he had trained 50 apprentices. Those 50 trained others. The knowledge multiplication effect was exponential. Traditional tribes lost one expert. Temujin gained a training system that produced hundreds. This single decision created more wealth than Rome accumulated in centuries. By 1200, defection rates told the story. Entire clans were abandoning their hereditary chiefs to join Temujin's merit-based system. A skilled blacksmith who had been born a slave could become a Mingan commander. A Chinese engineer captured in raid could earn more than a Mongol noble. Pattern interrupts kept the system dynamic. Every member knew that their position depended on current performance, not past achievement. A commander who failed was immediately replaced by whoever proved more capable. This created what modern economists call competitive pressure for optimization. But Temujin called it something simpler: survival. Here's the detail that changes everything. Traditional armies fought for plunder. Temujin's forces fought for shares in a continuing enterprise. When you defeated an enemy, you didn't just take their gold, you absorbed their entire economic system. Enemy craftsmen became your craftsmen. Enemy trade routes became your trade routes. Wealth multiplication, not wealth extraction. The Karaite watched their economy drain away as their best people defected. The Naimans saw their trade networks coopted by Mongol efficiency. By 1203, Jamukha commanded a coalition of traditional nobles, united by one fear: Temujin's economic system would destroy their hereditary wealth forever. They were right. But wait, it gets even more revolutionary. In traditional steppe warfare, defeating an enemy meant taking their possessions and leaving them destitute. Temujin introduced something unprecedented. Defeated enemies who submitted were immediately incorporated into the Mingan system with full share rights. Yesterday's enemy became tomorrow's shareholder. This changed the entire game. Statistical reality was undeniable. A warrior in Temujin's system earned 5 times more than traditional tribal warriors, not through looting, but through systematic wealth creation. The poorest Mongol in the Mingan system lived better than middle-ranking nobles in traditional tribes. Word spread across the steppes like wildfire. Modern economists call this impossible, yet the evidence is overwhelming. By 1204, Temujin commanded 60,000 warriors, organized into 60 Mingans. Each Mingan generated wealth equivalent to a Chinese provincial city. Without a single coin minted, without any banking system, without even written records, he had created the steppe's most powerful economy. The final unification battles weren't really about military might. They were hostile economic takeovers. When the Naiman Khan gathered his forces, his own generals were already calculating their potential shares in Temujin's system. The Karaite collapse came not through military defeat, but through economic desertion. Togrul Khan died abandoned, his gold and silk worthless without men to defend them. The next part sounds like fantasy, but it's documented fact. By 1204, every major tribe faced a choice: join Temujin's system or face economic extinction. The Great Kurultai of 1206 wasn't just a coronation, it was the IPO of human history's most revolutionary economic system. Here, in a vast gathering of the united Mongol tribes, Temujin, now proclaimed Genghis Khan, announced the rules that would transform global economics forever. But Genghis Khan had one more innovation. Standing before assembled thousands, he proclaimed the Great Yasa, not just a legal code, but an economic operating system. No Mongol could enslave another Mongol. Merit alone determined position. Death to anyone who didn't share battlefield spoils according to the established formula. Death to any merchant who was harmed within Mongol territory. That last law would reshape the world. Think about what this meant for a common soldier. In European armies, a knight kept his plunder. Common soldiers got scraps. In Chinese armies, generals enriched themselves while conscripts starved. But in Genghis Khan's system, every single warrior was guaranteed their mathematical share of every victory. From the Khan himself to the newest recruit, the formula was transparent and inviolable. The decimal organization scaled perfectly. 10 warriors formed an Arban. 10 Arbans formed a Zun. 10 Zuns formed a Mingan. 10 Mingans formed a Tumen. Each level had its commander, chosen by merit, not birth. But here's what made it revolutionary. Each unit was economically self-sufficient, yet integrated into the larger system. Like cells in a body, They could function independently or combine for massive operations. This brings us to the revolution's next phase. With Mongolia unified, Genghis Khan possessed something unprecedented, a nation where every citizen was economically motivated toward collective success. Traditional empires relied on fear or duty. The Mongol Empire ran on aligned incentives. Every arrow shot, every mile ridden, every enemy defeated meant direct, mathematical improvement in personal wealth. The first target was strategic, the Tangut Kingdom of Xixia, controlling Silk Road access. But the Mongol approach shattered conventional warfare economics. Instead of demanding massive tribute that would impoverish Xixia, Genghis Khan offered something unprecedented. Submit, and your merchants would receive protection across the entire steppe. Your trade would multiply. Your cities would grow richer under Mongol rule than independence. What came next put Silicon Valley to shame. The Xixia campaign demonstrated the Mingan system's international scalability. Captured Chinese engineers weren't enslaved. They were recruited with full shares. Their knowledge of siege warfare was immediately distributed throughout the Mongol system. Within months, nomads who had never seen a city wall were operating sophisticated catapults. The Jin dynasty of northern China watched in disbelief. Their traditional defense, paying tribute to play tribes against each other, was worthless. Genghis Khan rejected their offer of 500,000 bolts of silk and 250,000 ounces of silver. Why accept one-time payment when you could own the entire production system? Here's the part that economists still debate. The Mongol military was simultaneously the most efficient army and trading company in history. Each Tumen operated like a modern multinational corporation's division. They conquered territory, yes, but immediately converted it to productive use. Enemy soldiers became employees. Enemy craftsmen became partners. Enemy merchants became distributors. The first glimpse of empire-wide implementation came during the Jin campaign. Mongol commanders didn't just track military objectives, they calculated economic returns. Destroying a city meant destroying future tax revenue, but converting a city meant multiplying wealth indefinitely. The mathematics favored conversion. This is where traditional historians miss the point. When Genghis Khan proclaimed religious freedom throughout his empire, it wasn't tolerance, it was economics. Persecuting merchants for their faith disrupted trade. Dead merchants generated no wealth. Protected merchants attracted more merchants. The Mongol Empire became history's first genuinely safe international trade zone. Revolutionary announcements came rapidly. Any merchant carrying a Mongol passport, a paisa, could travel from Korea to Kiev without fear. Theft from a merchant meant death, no exceptions. Trade routes were patrolled and protected. Caravans were provided with supplies and guides. The Silk Road didn't just revive, it exploded. The statistics are staggering. Silk Road traffic increased 500% in just 5 years. Cities that surrendered peacefully saw their wealth double within a decade. The poorest Mongol soldier accumulated more wealth in one campaign than a European peasant saw in a lifetime. Traditional economies couldn't compete with this systematic wealth generation. By 1211, as Mongol forces approached the Jin capital, Chinese ministers faced an impossible choice: fight and face economic annihilation, or surrender and potentially grow richer. Many chose wealth. Entire provinces switched sides without battle, calculating that Mongol shares exceeded anything the Jin emperor could offer. But the most shocking part was yet to come. The Khwarezmian Empire, controlling Central Asian trade routes, made a fatal error. When the governor of Otrar executed a Mongol trade caravan and stole their goods, he didn't just commit murder, he violated the fundamental law of Mongol economics. Genghis Khan's response would demonstrate why you never disrupted the wealth generation machine. The truth is more incredible than any fiction. With Mongolia united, Genghis Khan turned his economic weapon outward, and the world's richest civilizations never saw it coming. The Otrar incident of 1218 triggered history's first total economic war. When Khwarezmian governor Inalchuk executed 450 Mongol merchants and stole their caravan, he thought he was seizing wealth. Instead, he signed his empire's death warrant. Death to a merchant meant death to an economy. This was Mongol law, and Genghis Khan intended to demonstrate why. What happened next redefined human civilization. Genghis Khan sent 3 envoys to Shah Muhammad II, demanding justice. The Shah, ruling the richest empire in Central Asia, killed one envoy and humiliated the others. His message was clear: traditional wealth backed by city walls could ignore nomadic threats. He calculated based on old economics. His miscalculation would reshape the world. The Mongol response revolutionized warfare economics forever. Genghis Khan didn't just mobilize an army. He activated an entire economic system. Every Mingan received precise instructions. This wasn't a raid for plunder, but a hostile takeover of the global trading system. The campaign would demonstrate why the Mingan structure was history's most powerful wealth-generating mechanism. Consider the numbers. The Khwarezmian Empire boasted 400,000 soldiers, dozens of fortified cities, and treasuries filled with centuries of Silk Road profits. The Mongol force numbered 120,000, with no siege equipment and no permanent bases. Traditional military science declared Mongol victory impossible. Traditional military science didn't understand economic warfare. Here's where the story becomes almost unbelievable. As Mongol forces approached, something unprecedented happened in Khwarezmian cities. Merchants began calculating. Under the Shah, they paid crushing taxes, faced corrupt officials, and risked banditry on trade routes. Under Mongol rule, they would pay lower taxes, receive absolute protection, and access continent-spanning trade networks. The choice became mathematical. The siege of Otrar demonstrated the new economics of conquest. Genghis Khan offered the city clear terms: surrender, and every merchant, craftsman, and useful citizen would be integrated into the Mongol system with full share rights. Resist, and face complete economic erasure. The governor who had killed the merchants would die regardless. That was non-negotiable. But the city's economy could survive, and even thrive. When Otrar fell after a 5-month siege, the economic execution was precise. The governor was killed by having molten silver poured into his eyes and ears, poetic justice for his greed. But skilled workers were immediately recruited. The city's trade connections were mapped and absorbed. Within weeks, Otrar's surviving merchants were wealthier than before, now protected by Mongol law. This pattern repeated across the empire. Bukhara, the city of merchants, surrendered after its garrison fled. Genghis Khan entered the great mosque and declared, "Your Shah thought gold made him powerful. Today, you learn that movement of gold makes power." The city's merchants were registered, given Mongol protection certificates, and their trade routes secured. Bukhara's economy doubled within 2 years. But Samarkand tells the most remarkable story. The jewel of the Silk Road, with walls 20 miles in circumference and a garrison of 110,000, it should have been impregnable. Yet when Mongol forces arrived using Chinese siege equipment operated by Chinese engineers paid in shares, the city's own economics became its enemy. Merchants opened the gates from within, calculating that cooperation meant wealth, while resistance meant poverty. The implications rippled outward like economic shockwaves. Every city watched neighbors who surrendered grow richer, while those who resisted vanished. The Mingan system's multiplication effect became visible on a continental scale. A Chinese engineer teaching siegecraft to Mongols earned shares in every city taken. A Muslim merchant providing intelligence received percentage rights on future trade routes. Loyalty became literally profitable. This changed the entire game. Traditional conquest meant replacing one ruling elite with another while the economy suffered. Mongol conquest meant economic integration and expansion. Persian administrators found themselves managing larger territories. Arab merchants accessed Chinese markets. Chinese craftsmen sold to European buyers. The Mongol Empire wasn't destroying economies. It was creating the world's first global market. The pursuit of Shah Muhammad demonstrated mobile economics defeating static wealth. The Shah fled with his treasury, believing gold meant power. But his gold couldn't buy food in hostile territory, couldn't purchase loyalty from unpaid soldiers, couldn't create wealth in isolation. He died on a Caspian island, surrounded by treasure, but economically worthless. Meanwhile, Mongol soldiers grew richer with each mile conquered, their shares multiplying with every economic system absorbed. Statistical analysis reveals the stunning transformation. In 1218, before the Khwarezmian campaign, a Mongol soldier's average wealth equaled perhaps 30 horses and a share in local trade. By 1221, that same soldier owned shares in transcontinental commerce worth more than entire villages. The poorest Mongol warrior lived better than middle-ranking Persian nobles. Merit-based wealth had triumphed over hereditary riches. The Silk Road didn't connect trade, it became trade. Under Mongol control, a merchant could travel from Beijing to Baghdad, knowing every official, every checkpoint, every way station operated under the same economic rules. No bribes, no arbitrary taxes, no local strongmen, just mathematical shares of profit flowing to those who enabled commerce. The road's traffic increased 1,000% in 15 years. Perspective jumping reveals the system's genius. A Mongol commander calculated, take this city violently, gain its current treasury, but destroy future revenue. Convert this city peacefully, gain exponentially growing wealth forever. A Chinese merchant realized, under the Jin, I traded locally with heavy taxes. Under Mongols, I trade globally with protection. A Persian banker watched his traditional usury business collapse as Mongol trade efficiency made hoarding capital pointless. Wealth now came from movement, not accumulation. The Jin dynasty campaign showed the system at full power. Cities that resisted, like Zhongdu, modern Beijing, faced systematic economic destruction. Not random pillage, but calculated removal of wealth-generating capacity. Engineers were relocated, trade routes redirected, administrative systems absorbed. The city wasn't just conquered, it was economically digested. But cities that surrendered early, like Datong, experienced economic renaissance. Mongol investment in infrastructure, protection of trade, and integration into the continental system created boom conditions. Chinese histories record merchant families growing wealthier under Mongol rule than during the Jin dynasty's peak. The empire that owned nothing controlled everything. The human cost was undeniable. Millions died in resistance. Entire regions were depopulated. But here's the economic paradox. Areas that survived grew wealthier than ever before. The Mongol system was binary, total destruction or total integration. No middle ground existed. This brutality had economic logic. Half-conquered territories generated no wealth. Fully integrated ones generated maximum wealth. By 1223, the Mongol Empire stretched from Korea to the Caspian. Each component operated on the same economic principles. A Korean craftsman's innovation could be in Persian markets within months. An Arab merchant's trade route became accessible to Chinese traders. The Minggan system had scaled from tribal organization to continental integration. The Battle of the Kalka River introduced Europe to Mongol economics. Russian princes, accustomed to fighting for territory, couldn't comprehend an enemy who fought for systematic wealth generation. Mongol forces defeated the combined Russian armies, not through superior numbers, but superior economic motivation. Every Mongol warrior knew victory meant increased shares. Russian soldiers fought for princes who hoarded wealth. Death created more wealth than life ever had. This sounds paradoxical, but the Mongol system transformed conquest into investment. Every enemy eliminated meant their economic niche became available. Every city taken meant new nodes in the trade network. The system was self-reinforcing. Success created wealth, which motivated greater success, which created more wealth. The final phase of Genghis Khan's life demonstrated the ultimate merger of warfare and economics. The return to Mongolia in 1225 wasn't a retreat, but a strategic consolidation. The empire needed administrative systems to match its military success. Chinese administrators, Persian accountants, and Arab merchants were brought to Mongolia, creating history's first truly international civil service. The Tangut campaign of 1227 would be Genghis Khan's last, but it showed the system's maturity. Instead of simple conquest, Mongol forces engaged in sophisticated economic warfare. Trade routes were selectively disrupted to pressure specific cities. Economic intelligence networks identified which merchants to recruit and which to eliminate. The empire operated like a massive corporation with military divisions. In 1227, as Genghis Khan lay dying, he had solved the impossible equation, I leave you no treasury, for you are the treasury. These words, spoken on Genghis Khan's deathbed in 1227, encapsulated history's greatest economic revolution. The man who had started with nothing, who owned no palace, minted no coins, and kept no personal wealth, was dying as the richest human in history. But his true legacy wasn't in gold. It was in the system that would outlive him by centuries. The succession plan revealed the Minggan system's ultimate genius. Unlike traditional empires that fragmented when the founder died, Genghis Khan had created self-sustaining economic machinery. His empire was divided among 4 sons, not as competing territories but as integrated economic zones. Each son inherited not land, but shares in the continental system. Ogedei received China, Chagatai Central Asia, Jochi's heirs the Western Steppes, and Tolui the Mongol homeland, but all remained economically interdependent. This is where history took its sharpest turn. Traditional succession meant civil war as heirs fought for the biggest piece. But in the Mongol system, fighting your brother meant destroying your own wealth. Chinese silk needed Central Asian routes to reach Persian markets. Russian furs required steppe corridors to access Chinese buyers. The brothers were forced into cooperation by economic reality. Immediate effects were staggering. Within months of Genghis Khan's death, trade actually increased. Merchants who had hesitated, wondering if the system would survive its creator, discovered it ran automatically. Every Minggan commander knew their role. Every trade route operated on established principles. Every soldier understood their shares depended on collective success. The machine functioned without its inventor. The numbers tell an incredible story. In 1227, the Mongol Empire controlled 12 million square miles and 100 million subjects. By 1230, without additional major conquests, the wealth flowing through the system had doubled. How? Dead capital became living investment. Chinese agricultural surplus funded Persian crafts production. Persian crafts paid for Russian raw materials. Russian materials supplied Chinese workshops. The multiplication effect was exponential. Ögedei Khan's coronation in 1229 demonstrated the new reality. Unlike his father, who lived in felt tents, Ögedei built Karakorum, not as personal luxury, but as economic infrastructure. The city became the nerve center of Eurasian trade, where Chinese clerks calculated shares beside Persian accountants and Russian merchants. It was history's first truly international city, where wealth flowed according to merit-based mathematics rather than ethnic privilege. What came next defied conventional economics. The Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, created conditions for wealth generation that surpassed conquest profits. With bandits eliminated and trade routes secured, merchant survival rates jumped from 20% to 98%. The cost of trade goods plummeted as risk premiums vanished. A Chinese silk bolt that once quintupled in price reaching Europe now merely doubled. The savings enriched everyone in the chain. Personal stories illuminate the transformation. Yelu Chukai, a Chinese administrator who joined the Mongols, convinced Ögedei that taxing productive cities generated more wealth than plundering them. His economic models showed that a 10% tax on thriving commerce exceeded 100% confiscation of static wealth. The Mongols became history's first rulers to understand sustainable revenue generation. Consider Wang Zhen, a Chinese merchant whose grandfather had been confined to local trade under the Jin dynasty. By 1235, Wang operated trading posts from Bukhara to Kunbalik, Beijing, protected by Mongol law and paying standardized taxes. His wealth exceeded what his family had accumulated in 10 generations. Multiply this by thousands of merchants, and you understand the economic explosion. The four Khanates developed economic specializations while remaining integrated. The Yuan dynasty in China became the manufacturing hub. The Ilkhanate in Persia managed transcontinental trade. The Golden Horde controlled northern routes and resource extraction. The Chagatai Khanate secured central corridors. Each specialized, yet depended on others, economic interdependence, preventing political fragmentation. Death tolls from conquest were massive, perhaps 40 million across Eurasia, yet survivor populations grew wealthier than pre-Mongol peaks. This paradox troubled traditional historians, but makes economic sense. Reduced populations with increased trade efficiency meant more wealth per capita. A Persian craftsman in 1240 accessed markets and materials unavailable to his grandfather. His individual productivity multiplied, but the real revolution was just beginning. The Mongol system had demonstrated that wealth came not from hoarding but from circulation, not from controlling resources but from enabling exchange, not from hereditary privilege but from merit-based contribution. Traditional empires with their treasuries and currencies suddenly looked primitive. The Mongols had invented something more powerful than money. They had created systematic wealth generation. The Minggan system evolved into the decimal administrative structure that governed a quarter of the earth. Each unit maintained economic autonomy while contributing to collective prosperity. A rebellion in one Minggan meant economic isolation, a death sentence in the interconnected system. Loyalty was mathematically profitable. Betrayal was economically suicidal. By 1240, as Mongol forces approached Europe and completed Chinese conquest, the empire generated more wealth annually than Rome had accumulated in its entire history. Yet no central treasury existed. No currency was minted. Wealth flowed through the system like blood through arteries, reaching every participant according to mathematical formulae. The poorest Mongol soldier lived better than he would have as an independent chief. History's first economic singularity had occurred. The Mongol system had reached critical mass, where it generated wealth faster than it could be consumed. Investment in infrastructure, protection of trade, and merit-based advancement created compound returns. The empire without currency had made currency worthless. The Mongol economic revolution echoes through 8 centuries to our present day. When modern tech companies give stock options to every employee, they're using Genghis Khan's playbook. When multinational corporations operate across borders under unified systems, they're following Mingan principles. When venture capitalists prioritize human capital over physical assets, they're applying lessons from the steppes. The 4 Khanates eventually fragmented, but their economic DNA persisted. The Yuan dynasty introduced paper money backed not by gold, but by trade flow confidence. Fiat currency, 7 centuries before modern central banks. The Ilkhanate's protection of merchants established precedents for international commercial law. The Golden Horde's trade routes became the foundations for Russian expansion. The Silk Road's integration created templates for globalization. Modern parallels are striking. Platform economies like Amazon or Alibaba don't own inventory. They control flow, exactly like Mongol trade protection. Network effects, where each additional user increases value for all users, mirror how each conquered city enriched the entire Mongol system. Gig economy workers choosing performance-based earnings over fixed salaries, echo Mongol warriors preferring shares to salary. The meritocracy precedent transformed civilization. Before Mongol influence, every major society restricted leadership by birth. The Mongol demonstration that merit-based selection generated superior outcomes gradually infected even hereditary monarchies. Today's assumption that talent matters more than lineage is Genghis Khan's gift to humanity. Why did currency-based empires collapse while the Mongols endured for centuries? Traditional empires hoarded wealth in treasuries, creating stagnation. The Mongol system kept wealth moving, generating returns. Rome fell when it couldn't pay soldiers with debased currency. Mongol soldiers remained loyal because their shares in real trade grew constantly. Static wealth systems decay. Dynamic wealth systems grow. Financial historians trace modern concepts to Mongol innovations. Venture capital, investing in human potential rather than existing assets, was how Genghis Khan built his initial power. Stock options, profit sharing, and performance bonuses all have precedence in the Mingan system. Even hostile takeovers, where inefficient management is replaced while keeping productive assets, mirror Mongol conquest strategies. The ultimate lesson transcends economics. Genghis Khan understood that wealth isn't about accumulation but circulation, not about possession but control, not about inheritance but creation. In destroying traditional economies, he forced humanity to discover that prosperity comes from enabling others' success, not hoarding advantages. Today, as digital currencies challenge physical money and remote work dissolves geographic boundaries, we're witnessing another Mongol moment. Traditional economic structures face disruption from systems that prioritize efficiency over tradition, merit over privilege, network effects over institutional power. The questions Genghis Khan posed: why should birthplace determine opportunity? Why should static wealth outweigh dynamic capability remain radically relevant? The man who owned nothing owned everything, because he understood that wealth isn't about what you have, but what you control. In creating history's first shareholding army, first protected international trade zone, and first merit-based continental administration, Genghis Khan didn't just conquer the world, he gave it an economic operating system that, in evolved forms, still runs beneath our modern prosperity. His empire's currency was human potential. His treasury was the trade routes of Eurasia. His legacy is the principle that systematic wealth creation supersedes wealth extraction. 8 centuries later, in boardrooms and startups, in international trade agreements and digital platforms, the ghost of the Khan, who owned nothing, still shapes how humanity creates and shares wealth.